Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Tim. So today's video is going to be a painting tutorial. We're going to be painting a sunset island scene with a cute little boat in the background. We will be using the damp brush. Currently, it's not available in the iPad version of Procreate, but it is still available in the iPhone Pocket Procreate version, and you will need to transfer the brush to your iPad. Right now, I'm working on a video on how to recreate the damp brush from scratch, and that's coming very soon. If you don't have access to the Pocket Procreate version, please feel free to use any brush that you love using. So here in just a moment, I'm going to share my brush settings with you, so feel free to slow down or pause the video at any time to copy these settings down. If you would still like to use this brush but not use my settings, the only thing I would really recommend is changing the grain scale and turning it down to like 15 or 16%. That way it doesn't leave so many potholes. The stamp itself has just a lot of holes in it, and it looks a lot better when you're blending if the scale is turned down. I will also be sharing my color palette here, so please feel free to take a screenshot so you can use the same colors that I use. I also in this video included 2 pauses in the video, that way you can catch up or to take a break. But if you need to pause or slow down the video at any time, please feel free to do so. So to begin, the canvas size is 2048 pixels by 2552. Every new element we add as well will also be done on a new layer until we merge it down. So we will start by taking one of the 2 of the darker blues. We will be using the lighter of the 2 colors and laying that down over the whole canvas. On a new layer, we will lay down the darkest shade of blue on the very top and the middle and bottom of the image, and using a large size of the blender brush, which will also be with the damp brush setting, with wide sweeping strokes, lightly begin to blend out our background. I also have the paintbrush cursor turned on, that way you can see where my brush is. Really just going in here with light sweeping motions and really working that dark color into the background. So on a new layer, we're going to start with this bright cherry red color, and I absolutely love this color. It kind of reminds me of a cherry slushie, with a large brush and begin to blur and work that color into the background. We're going to lay this color down twice. The first time just really creating a nice gradient from the blue into the bottom. The second time you see me apply it, we're just going to work it down just a little bit and try to preserve some of that red color. So in another new layer coming up with a slightly smaller brush, we're going to be working this bright pumpkin orange in at the bottom and just lightly blending and blurring that color up into the red. Really just creating a nice gradient. So in another new layer, we're going to be repeating the process with yellow. And just creating a nice bright blend at the bottom, working that up into the orange. We're going to merge those layers down, and with a large blending brush, start to blend those colors together a little bit. We want to create a really nice painted texture. This is where your creativity really can come in handy. Sunsets are so beautiful and they're so much fun to paint. Once you're happy with your blend, the next thing we're going to do is copy that layer and paste it. So now we have 2 of those layers. We're going to flip it upside down and move it into the middle of the painting. We're then going to take the Gaussian blur tool and start to blur it up to about 30-40% or so. And the next thing we're going to do is taking the blending tool and the colors we just created and blend it out into what will become the ocean. And this is so much fun. I love creating reflections this way. So coming up here in just a moment, and with a light pressure, you will create a new layer and take that bright yellow we used in the actual sunset part and lay some color down the center and begin to blur it out, creating the reflection base of where the sun will be setting, just lightly blending into the color of what we just created. One of the biggest reasons I keep all of my layers separated at first, especially at the beginning, is to prevent any muddiness. So just like with traditional painting, the colors will definitely muddy together, and this is the easiest way to help prevent that. So coming up here in just a moment, in another new layer, we will add the palest banana yellow we have on our palette into the center in a small strip and repeat what we just did with the yellow. I ended up thinking it needed a little bit more, so I ended up duplicating that layer, merging it down, and then just continue to blend it out a little bit. So once you're happy with the blending, you're going to merge all of those new created layers down, and then on the merged layer, you will begin to slightly blend out and blur those colors just a little bit more to help add softness and add more reflection to the water. Coming up here in just a moment, we're going to create the land in the background. Using the darkest color of green, we will begin to sketch in the shape of our land. And feel free to pause at any moment too if you need to catch up. I know we're doing a lot. And feel free to create any shape of land that makes you happy. This is just what I liked. We're going to slightly blur those edges out too, just kind of soften them up and blend them in with the color that we've already laid down. This is where we're going to take advantage of the opacities in blending, which will help unify the background and the color we just laid down and add a bunch of dimension to the painting. Next, we're going to copy that layer, flip it horizontally and bring it over to the other side and begin adding to it a little bit. That way it doesn't just look like a copy of the other layer. I'm going to take mine and move mine just a little bit. That way it's centered a little bit better on the water line. That little corner piece you see me erasing here, we're going to change it a little bit later on to a little bit more once we add the sailboat in. In another new layer with the pale banana yellow, you're going to paint a circle for the sun and lightly blend over it with the blend brush. I'm going to make my sun just a little bit bigger and move it a little bit closer to the center to be right under the reflection. Coming up here in just a moment in another new layer, we're going to take that same dark shade of green that we used to block in the island with, and we will use it to create a new island shape in the bottom left front of our painting. We are also going to lightly clean up the edges too with the eraser tool, and I did use the damp brush shape to clean up those edges with. So here we've got most of the painting base started. We're going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of the details coming up. Feel free to take a pause if you need to catch up if you need to finish painting or if you need a light refreshment. Personally, I think I'm going to go make myself a chai tea latte and be right back. So on a new layer and the brightest shade of green in our palette, I want to use a smaller size brush with the opacity turned down and really light-handedly starting from the top, working down, start to sketch in the shape of the grass. And you definitely want to leave a little bit of the darkness peeking behind the grass to create the illusion of more depth and space. And then you will lightly use the blur tool to lightly smooth out those areas. So over the last couple of months, I've scrapped a couple of different painting tutorials because they just weren't right and I wasn't happy with them yet and I wasn't happy with the brush. And I really wanted to create a tutorial with a brush that really mimicked a more traditional looking medium for those painters who were really looking to switch from traditional painting or just to learn digital painting in general in a more easy and a more natural feeling way. I feel like when I started, there weren't a whole lot of tutorials like this out there, not even as many as there are now. It's definitely come a long way. But I knew one day when I started, I really wanted to create something that I would have enjoyed when I first started, and this has been a really fun challenge for me. So in a new layer, we are going to start round 2 of the grass with a slightly smaller brush and about the same amount of opacity, begin to sketch in more detailed shapes within the grass we just created. Really focusing in the brightest color more towards the top of the hill where the sunset light would be hitting it. Here in just a moment, we're going to be adding sand in here, so we don't want to drag all of that bright green all the way down to the bottom. You want to leave some of the shadow in there. In these areas of the grass, a very light hand, and it's almost like a back and forth boomerang shape. The harder you push, I'm using an Apple pencil as well, the harder you push, the more color you're going to get. That's why I turn the opacity down even more than what you might think. But I love creating grass. So in another new layer, we're going to start with the sandy beige color in our palette, and we're going to start laying down the sand. Blocking in some heavier shapes on this side because there is going to be a bank on the left-hand side. Here, we're really just refining what we just created, and we're going to be adding a little bit more. The sand is on a different layer too as well. It's not on the same layer as the grass yet. That way we can adjust it, and that really helps keep things separated. But we're going in and still adding a little bit more bank, adding a little bit more of that sand blur into the water. That'll really help when we go to add the water line too. It'll really help make it look a little bit more realistic. So coming up here in a new layer, we're going to create the pail. And by doing that, we're going to start by sketching a square with the slightly darker red color in the bottom left-hand corner of our palette and creating a line on top. It kind of makes what looks like a top hat shape. That's probably the easiest way to create a pail. And using the eraser tool, you're going to erase the edges to make it look a little bit sharper. And then using the bright cherry red from before in the background in a very low opacity in a new layer, put a little bit of a highlight over top of the pail just to create a little bit of depth and shape. And with that same shade of beige for the sand, you're going to create the color of U. You're going to, in a new layer, create a line with an upside down U. You're going to fill it in and use the eraser brush to clean up the edges, kind of like the shape of a broom. And now you've got a cute little pail and shovel. We're also going to go in here in just a second and duplicate the sand layer and just the opacity a little bit so that way the sand looks a little bit fuller. And with that same shade of beige, we're going to go in and use for the sand. And with a very small size, we're going to sketch in the shape of a heart, which we will use to do something special with later. You're going to merge all of those layers down, and on a new layer, we're going to begin sketching the sailboat. To begin sketching the sailboat, we're going to start by sketching a triangle shape and filling it in with the dark maroonish brown color in the bottom right-hand corner of our palette. We're going to clean up those edges a little bit too with the eraser brush. I like the shape to be soft looking, but yet still sharp in shape. And then you're going to duplicate that layer, flip it horizontally, and then using the freeform lasso tool, change the shape of it to be a little bit taller than the first triangle. And then we're going to create the base of our boat, and we're going to want to create it right under those two triangles we just created. And you're going to want to create that boat shape by creating a line, and you can still do this on the same layer too, and that's too far down. Creating it right underneath those two triangles. And if you have trouble creating the little points on the end, you can always use the eraser tool to help you create a sharper shape at the end. You're going to add little connector lines from the actual sails to the boat itself here in just a second. And we're going to make the boat just a little bit bigger because it's a little too small. And here in just a second, we're going to erase the little bit of island that's behind the boat. That way it doesn't... I think it looks weird behind it. The layers aren't 100% opaque and there's a little bit of an overlap and I just don't want it in the painting. So we're going to erase that here. But here you're going to see me erasing some of the island, cleaning it up a little bit. And that's why it's so important to keep all of those layers separate. So we're going to duplicate the boat and we're going to make it a little bit more opaque. We're going to take that and use the eraser tool. Up close, the edges of your boat are probably going to be a little bit fuzzy, so you're going to see me cleaning up the edge lines a little bit and making them a little bit sharper. And then you'll see me merge all of those layers down. That way, I think the land and the boat end up on the same layer. It's okay if yours are separate. That's just how mine ended up working out. So the next thing that we're going to be creating on a new layer is starting the palm trees. The palm trees don't grow straight up and down, so you'll want to start with a slightly curved line, and you'll want to use the dark brown from the palette. This isn't going to be a super thick line, and the base of the tree is actually going to be slightly thicker than the top, so it's going to taper a little bit where the trunk meets the ground, and then we're going to just lightly blend those edges. So the next thing we're going to be creating is the actual palm tree itself. And we're going to start by taking the darkest green that we used in the island color, and we're going to start sketching where the palm tree is going to live at. So you're going to take very small strokes here coming up and start creating a downward motion to create the actual leaves of the palm tree. The palm tree leaves are actually shaped like a fan, and I did find it actually really helpful to look at the shape of a palm tree while painting this, so that might help you a little bit better. Finishing each branch the same way as the last. Also, don't be afraid to turn the painting too. That definitely helps with your angles. In the next step, we're going to be taking that bright shade of green that we used in the grass and basically just repeating what we did here. We're going to be using that bright shade of green just to create a little bit of dimension over top of those new leaves. And then we're going to be turning the opacity down just a tiny bit. You'll see me do that here in a moment. And we're going to merge it down. Definitely using a light hand throughout this process, just repeating from branch to branch. I feel like the tree is still a little bit too light, so I'm going to duplicate the entire tree, and then I'm going to merge those layers down, fill in that tree right there because the trunk is still a little bit too light, and then we're going to duplicate the tree again and merge those layers down so it's a little bit more opaque. Now, blending that brown down too just a little bit, we're going to use the eraser tool and carve the base of the tree out just a little bit more. So next we are going to make this palm tree a little bit bigger, and then we're going to duplicate that layer so there are now 2 trees, and the slightly smaller tree, we're going to tilt it to the right just a little bit more, and we're going to move it over and shrink it. In this next section, we're just going to clean up a couple of things. I'm going to move the line up just a little bit more, and we're going to add a little bit more depth and thickness to that tree edge. That way we kind of make both trees look a little bit different. And we're just using that dark brown color again. And then here in a moment too, you're going to see me start cleaning up the edges of the trees and then clean up the boat shape just a little bit more. And please feel free at any time again to pause the video, because I know we're going really fast and we've done a lot in this section. We are approaching the 3rd break, but we're going up here and just cleaning up these lines. And you can really see up close. This is where you can really go up close and clean up those edges. You can't really see it from far away, but making those little changes up close will make a huge difference from far away. And there you can see the island behind the sailboat again, so we're just erasing that a little bit more, and now it looks opaque again. And then just cleaning up that boat shape just a little bit more. And when you're cleaning it too, if you take too much away, you can always use the blur tool or the paint tool again and recreate the line and make it a little bit stronger. But here we have reached part 3. So if you need to catch up, or if you'd like to get up and move around, definitely feel free to. And when you're ready, we'll continue part 3. So in a new layer and a very small brush, using the bright sky blue in the bottom right hand corner next to the maroon, we are going to start creating the stars. With a very light hand, you're going to create little dots in different sizes in the top part of the painting, where the darker shades of blue and purple are meeting. And then with the same brush, you're going to take the color white, and we're going to add some more definition stars. And this is definitely one of my favorite ways to add some depth in the stars in the painting. By creating the blue ones, you make it look like they're further away. If they were all white, they all look too bright. The blue brings more attention to the white ones and makes them a little bit more special. Next, we are going to be in a new layer, creating the edge line along the water and the sand. Using the small brush around 50% opacity, we're going to start sketching in the edge line of the water along the beach. And just going in with a very light hand, lightly sketching in those areas. We don't want anything too harsh or bold yet. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to create another line behind it, because most of the time with little islands like this, the water is going to be very shallow and the waves are going to just kind of lightly roll in. We're going to drag those lines a little bit out further into the sea on the right-hand side, and then using the blending brush, we're going to soften all of those edges up. And after we're done softening it up, we're going to add a little bit more detail in there, just kind of going back and forth between adding and blending. Feel free to add as much or as little as you want to the shoreline. This is where I'm going to start adding a little bit of touch-up details. I want to add a little bit more sand to the right side here in just a second right there. I feel like I don't like the way the grass is sticking through the sand right there, which I'm glad it happened, because just in case this happens in your own painting, you can definitely go in and fix this. Super easy to touch up. Now we're going into the final details. So in another new layer, in the soft light function, we're going to add the color black in, and using a larger brush, start overlaying black over the edges of the painting. This is going to create a little bit more depth, and we're going to be creating the illusion of clouds in the sky. And this is using a super light hand with super light pressure. You are going to drag some of that darkness from the sides into the water and onto the grass island area. and over the beach line. That way it really helps to create more depth in the water. Oh yeah, already you can see how much depth that's added to the painting. So without this layer, I feel like it still looks a little bit flat, and this really helps to add a little bit more of the illusion of space. In another new layer, we're going to duplicate that soft light layer and merge them down together and just continue blending them out with a very light hand. So after you're happy with the blending that you've just done, in another new layer, you're going to use the hard light function, and you're going to be using the color black again and just deepening over top of those shadows we just created and lightly blending them out. Sure to keep using a really light hand and make sure to keep the opacity down to about 40 to 50%. That way you don't blend away all of the hard work you just did. It also helps to really add to the depth of the sky and the clouds. The next thing we're going to do is going to be super fun. We're going to make a copy of the boat layer, and we're going to flip it upside down. We're going to turn the tilt of the actual layer itself, and then we're going to actually turn the boat. And we're going to turn it in the direction that the shadow would go in, and that's slightly more to the right with the sun hitting it. We're going to make it a little bit smaller, and you're going to set that layer in hard light. You're going to turn the opacity down a little bit, and then we're going to start with a bigger brush with low opacity and start blending that area out to really help create the shadow cast by the sun in the water. I know this is a lot of blending, so if you need to pause the video, definitely please feel free to. Another new layer, we're going to be putting it in the overlay function, and we're going to be using the color white. And this is where your painting truly comes to life at. We're going to be using a very small brush with the opacity to about 60%, and we're going to lightly start sketching detail over top of the whole painting. And we're going to be laying that new white color down over top of the boat, creating more reflections in the water, really just adding lots of new fun little highlights and texture and color over the whole piece. Really love to use hard light, soft light, and the overlay tool a lot in just about every one of my paintings. This is such a great way to add more depth, detail, and highlight to your painting without needing like a huge color palette. And basically we are putting this all over the painting, creating little details over the boat itself on the sails. We're creating underneath the sun, creating brighter highlights. We're going to put it in the water. We're going to put it over on the edges, just really adding texture to that piece. And you can definitely add a lot of depth to the grass. So here you're going to place it just on the hill where the sunlight would be touching the edges to create kind of the reflection of the sun on the island. We're going to bring some of those highlights below to unify the rest of the painting together. And now we're going to take the blend tool with a slightly larger brush and about 50% opacity to start lightly blending out those details. Feel free to add as many or as little highlight as you want. This is your world. This is going to be layer 1 as well. We are going to go back in with a second layer, and we're getting close to being done. So in this next new layer, we're going to use the overlay function again in the color white, and we're going to take a smaller brush and we're going to create a little bit of a highlight on the sun and in the water. We're going to take that highlight up onto the boat. This really helps to add such a beautiful effect, almost like it's glowing. But you're going to take a really tiny brush here coming up, and we're going to start going back over it and adding even finer details to the painting. Basically just repeating what we did in the last step, just with another smaller size brush. In this section, we're basically just repeating what we did in the last layer, going through with a very fine detail brush and then switching back and forth between the blending brush, just really help creating that illusion of space and depth in the painting. It really helps to add so many beautiful little details. I'm going to go back through, something's driving me crazy. I'm going to add a little bit more green over the tops of those tree trunks just to kind of help blend them in with the rest of the grass. It was driving me crazy. I'm also going to, in the overlay function again, we're going to add just a little bit more white to the sun, and I'm going to add a little bit more of a highlight down the center of the water, just to give it a little bit more of a glow. And then I'm going to lightly blend that out. So the very last thing we're going to do today is actually going to require a different brush. You're going to open up the sketching section and you're going to choose the Narender pencil, and I'm super excited for this. You're going to go back and select the beige color and lighten it up a little bit with the sand. And to sign the painting, we're going to write our name in the sand. I was super excited about that idea, and I hope you were too. But we have reached the end of this painting and this tutorial, friend. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had fun painting this. It was a joy to create. Painting has changed my life in so many ways, and I'm so happy and excited to be able to share my love of this craft with you. If you recreate this painting, I would absolutely love to see it. Please feel free, if you're on Instagram, to tag me in your painting at Timstar Studio. I would love to see what you create. I'm actually working on so many new videos right now, and I can't wait to share them with you. I've got a couple of new tutorials on the horizon and a couple of reviews. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video, friend. Happy painting!